These are all the glaze buckets and colors that I have in the back of my classroom. The color is labeled on the wall, so you have front row and back row. And the color is also written on the face of the bucket. So there are two locations that you can ensure that you are using the correct color by looking at the wall and looking at the bucket. This is my glaze shelf. You can pick up pieces and read underneath or on the bottom to see what colors look like when fired. You can see what colors look like when they're layered. So Smoky Merlot over Indigo Float. This is seaweed by itself, 2 layers, dipped. And then this is seaweed underneath True Celadon. So you can see what happens when you layer. I also have these rings where you can pick your color and then look on the inside to find the name of that color. So the first thing you need to do is choose your color, and then you're going to use this mixer and the triggers here. You can spin the mixer in the water to wash off the mixer. Put the mixer into the bucket and actually start to mix up the color. So I spend a good 30 seconds to a full minute holding the mixer at medium speed and making sure that the glaze itself is swirling around. Tap the mixer, rinse it off, and then I can mix up the next color I want to use. This gets all of the glaze particles moving. It creates a really nice coverage of color. You don't want those good chemicals and good particles settling to the bottom and then it doesn't turn out the way you want it. So you always want to mix your glazes. So that's blue Rutile, 2 coats. You can see the color in the bucket is not the color that it fires. So it's very important to look at the glaze shelf to find your colors, not to look inside the bucket, because even though blue Rutile looks red in the bucket, it fires blue. So I'm going to dip this pot. And if you're going to dip pots, you can do 2 dips total. So I've dipped into caramel, really quick, in and out. And then once that's totally dry, I dip into blue Rutile. So I've got 2 coats, 1 of each color. I could also do 2 dips in blue Rutile and let each dry if I only want the pot to be 1 color, but you do 2 dips. You always want to make sure that you let each coat dry in between, and you never mix 2 wet glazes. These are not like a paint. You can layer colors on top of each other when the layers dry, but you cannot mix 2 wet glazes together. Each has its own specific chemical makeup. So for this pot, I'm going to dip just up to the rim, and I'm not using the tongs, I'm using my fingers because it gives me more control. And I'm going to let that dry. Doesn't take very long, maybe a minute. It'll feel chalky. And then I can do a second dip, because I want black to just be on the outside of the pot. I don't want it to be layered with another color. So I did 2 dips in black. Once that's dry, I now need to put glaze on the rim and on the inside. I'm going back to blue Rutile because I want to have blue on the inside. And I'm going to flip the cup over and just dip that rim into the blue Rutile. So very quick, very fast. Let that dry. Once you can touch it, dip that back in really quick. And then I can use the pour method. So I can fill up a cup with glaze and I can pour it inside of my form. And then I can kind of swirl it around and start to pour it back into the bucket. Make sure I'm rotating it so I'm covering all of my bisqueware. And any little areas that I didn't cover, I can just scoop some more glaze up, pour it in, and do the same thing. So you can do 1 or 2 pours to fill the inside. You can also pour glaze on the outside to get like a drip effect if you want it to be drippy. And I have that pot finished. 2 pots glazed. I can also brush my glazes on, so I can choose my colors, and I can have up to 4 colors if I want. And I'm going to scoop those colors out and put them into my cups, bring them over to my table, and I can apply these glazes with brushes. So you may be brushing these on kind of like you brush a paint on, but really it doesn't behave like paint. So what I'm doing is I am loading the brush up with glaze, and I am blotting it more so than brushing. I don't want to have streaky, thin brush lines. I want to cover the surface. And so I'm going to go all the way around the pot and apply my first coat. When you are brushing glazes onto your pottery, you need to apply 3 to 4 coats total. So that may be 3 or 4 coats in the same color, or you could do a coat in one color and then a coat in another color and go back and forth. Or you could do 4 separate coats and have each coat be a different color. So that's got to dry. As soon as it's dry, I can come back in with my second color and start to blot it on the surface. I don't mind that the glaze is running. I'd rather it be applied with the appropriate thickness that it needs to be. And you just want to make sure your layers are underneath are dry. Glaze has glass in it, so it's going to run and melt anyway. You cannot paint on a pattern or paint on detail work with bucket glazes because they have silica or glass. They will run. So these drips that are occurring make no difference. I'm just going to make sure I get that layer on. So now I have 2 layers completed. I will eventually be glazing the inside too. So I decided my third layer is going to be more of the blue. I want more blue to show than I want black. So that's why I'm doing 2 layers of blue, one on top of the other. And it's much more of like a loading the brush up with the color and blotting it on. And I often am stirring the glaze while it's in the cup to keep those particles suspended. Touching up the rim of the piece. Making sure I've got glaze along the bottom. And now I could brush the inside if I wanted to, but I feel like that takes a lot of time and I don't necessarily want to. So I'm just going to pour on the inside with my black and swirl it around. And then I'll pour some more in and get the areas that I missed. And I could pour 2 colors in too. So I could pour the black in and let that dry. And then I could pour the blue in on top of that and dump that out and have 2 different colors on the inside. But if you're pouring, it's never more than twice. And if you're dipping, it's never more than twice. And if you're brushing, it's 3 to 4 coats, depending on the thickness of your glaze. The last thing you need to do is to wipe the bottoms completely clean. So that means you will rotate your pot onto a large wet sponge, and you need to keep doing this until the bottom has no glaze whatsoever. Because glass has glaze in it, it will melt your pot to the surface of my shelf in my kiln if you do not clean it off entirely. Keep on rotating. Cleaning off the ring of that piece.